Hi, and welcome to Association Transformation, a new conversation advancing the impact and evolution of non-profit organizations and membership associations. We're always seeking diversity of thought and new examples of innovation in action so that we can share with our colleagues across the sector. And it's that commitment and the mission to drive organizations for social benefit that spurred this collaboration between the teams at Brewer Pratt Solutions in the US and UK-based Console Strategy. I'm Andrew Chamberlain, the Managing Director of Console Strategy.
And I'm Elisa Pratt, Chief Strategist with Brewer Pratt Solutions. And we've come together today with a couple special guests, and we want to take a deep dive into some issues. We're always looking at the topics and challenges, those opportunities facing the association community. And between Andy and I, we've seen a lot. Of course, he's much older than I am, but we've seen everything from membership and board challenges, leadership, advocacy, training, and education. There's nothing off limits for association transformation. And any subject that affects nonprofits, their survival or their success is up for discussion.
Yeah, I think you made it very clear that nothing's off limits just there, actually, Lisa. Thanks for that. No, I think you meant more experienced rather than old.
Yeah. Seasoned, maybe
seasoned. I'm like a barbecue, old and smoky.
Or bourbon, we can go with either. But today I wanted to look through the eyes of a group that I don't think has been given a very loud voice during some of these recent crises and the disruptions that we've seen over the last few weeks. And that's through the vendors and the sponsors, those service providers that associations rely on, not only to provide value, but to provide revenue. And given the disruption to global travel and consequently those conventions, conferences, and the business meeting experience, we wanted to better understand the impact that all of that is having on the sponsors and vendors of events. I know in the United States, there's this rapid push to get online, and I haven't seen those vendors and sponsors really represented in a similar or almost fair way. And I wanted to hear from them. But this morning, we're joined by two special guests, and I'll let David Abraham and Troy Woodham introduce themselves. Maybe we can start with David.
Hi, so I'm Dave Abraham, the Managing Director of a company called Wattle. We work with membership organisations, associations, not-for-profits, providing technology-based solutions, predominantly focusing around the digital side of things, so digital transformation programs, and the supporting technology around that. So I'll be your resident whiz kid for today.
And Troy Woodham's with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Group publisher with Naylor, and Naylor specializes in working in the association community with several main factors to keep in mind is just a better member engagement, help with associations communications to their members and a wide variety of products and services, and then ultimately help them drive non-dues revenue.
And you guys actually have, over 1,500 members or associations that you're supporting both in the United States and Canada, correct?
We do. The number seems to be growing by the day.
So your phone must be ringing off the hook for sponsorships, to be an exhibitor, to come to trade shows all the time.
Yes. I try and max it out 2 weeks per month, but it's definitely a lot of travel and visit with the association clients at their trade shows and in-person meetings. But yeah, it's a lot of visits to trade shows.
But that's obviously not been the case in the last 3 months, has it, Troy? You've not been traveling.
No, nope. My very last trade show was the last conference held in Las Vegas. It was called Con Expo, in collaboration with National EDC was there on their event. And Con Expo, Con Ag is it's held every 3 years. It's a very large event due to the size of it. And that was as we were leaving on that Friday, the world as we knew it was changing. Everything was shutting down literally while we were out there. And so that was their last event in Las Vegas.
And what about you, Dave? I mean, I'm guessing you've been pretty much glued to your desk for the last 3 months as well.
Haven't left, pretty much. So the day that it was first announced as advisory to work from home, which was March 16th, I think,
something
wasn't
like
it?
that.
Something along those lines. And then it was a week later that the government announced full lockdown. And but from the date when it was advisory, we relocated as a remote business straight away. We've got about there's 30 of us or thereabouts in total. So we transitioned to a remote operation literally within the space of a couple of hours. We made the decision at 4:30 the day that it was announced, in the following day, and I've barely left the house since. So it's been literally an overnight transformation, as Troy was just describing, and not just for us but for our clients as well. We've seen obviously the same happen across the board. Some made the transition pretty rapidly. Some are still struggling to this very day. So, yeah.
And in terms of your market interaction, other than your existing clients, Dave, I mean, have you been able to do any sort of business development over the last sort of 12 weeks, or is it all just ground to a halt?
The answer is yes. We have been able to continue with business development efforts, but I don't think that's necessarily I don't think that's a sign of the technology being an enabler per se. I actually think it's just because of the situation. And everybody else is in exactly the same situation. I think if we were just suddenly a remote located business refusing to go into face-to-face meetings when the world was normal, I don't think we would be doing very well. But everybody is in exactly the same situation, which makes it actually a great enabler for doing business in this situation. Everybody's jobs rely on things moving forward, don't they? At all levels of the supply chain, from the people purchasing the services to the people providing the services. We all want to continue doing business because we all want to keep our jobs. So as a result of that, we've not seen too much of a slowdown. We've just been awarded a new contract this morning. We've closed one of our biggest opportunities during lockdown. And we're still seeing a similar, if not slight, increased number of new business inquiries coming through as people have got more time and space to be able to write up things like tenders and so on. We're starting to see more of those coming through. So we've been fortunate in that we have been able to remain busy, but I think it's a general willingness across the board from people to continue doing business. So I've been pleasantly surprised.
But has that sponsorship ask, I'm assuming that whether it be clients or prospective clients would call you up to give you that opportunity to exhibit or present. Now that all of that is online, are you still getting those calls? Are you finding the return on investment for those virtual opportunities is still appealing?
Yeah, so with the organisations themselves, so the associations, we don't tend to get asked by the associations to contribute outside of the technology side of things, but we do get asked by supporting organisations around it to sponsor, exhibit, and attend events. And there's been a strong push towards keeping engagement and keeping those types of events running virtually. We haven't actually withdrawn sponsorship or contribution to any events that have ran in the sector. We've been actively contributing to them with various degrees of success. I think this is all quite new to everybody. Anybody running any form of event, our clients have a heavy dependency on events. It's a major part of an association's business. So for a lot of organisations, I've lost my train of thought there. That's going to need editing out.
Sorry, our producer Andy, he doesn't do any editing at all. Well... honestly, he just sits and laughs at us. Honestly.
So I think what I'm saying is that the organisations where we do attend events, there's been a very heavy push to keep those events running. The associations themselves, actually, I've seen the reverse. There's been, and I don't believe rightly actually, there's been a heavy pulling of events, in-person based events, to the detriment of the organisation from a revenue perspective. And it will vary based upon the associations, the organisations that we're working with. But I would say, anecdotally, looking at my own client base, that predominantly people are actually pulling the events and not running them, which I actually think is a mistake. The events that we've attended, I don't think anybody's got the mixture quite right yet, but we're all learning, and we're all trying something new at the moment. But I still think people should be trying to run those events.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there. I was just thinking, yeah, you're right. It's good that they are. Some are trying to translate their planned activities into a virtual environment. Is it right though that they should be charging me for that as a vendor if they're all just learning? Why do I want to pay for someone else's learning experience?
I'm with you, and I think we've got to try. If event revenue is a source of a source of income for an organisation, I don't think there's any harm in them trying to translate that into a virtual event. I'm not necessarily sure they should be charging the same price or full price for it. But think about it. Before this happened, it was perfectly normal to do things like purchase training online. It was perfectly acceptable for people to conduct online training, online exams. It's a major part of associations' revenue as well in many cases, delivering digital training, and people put a monetary value to that. And I think that there is a monetary value to events. I don't think that it's the norm at the moment to attend a virtual event, but there is a monetary value that can be placed against it.
And and Dave, I think you're right. The virtual events are evolving and they're continuing to get better. I've only sat on a few that are more than just a webinar, more than just a podcast, and I almost felt bad for the vendors. Their logo was thrown up on a slide at the beginning or the end, or they were referenced in passing. And in the back of my mind, I thought, gosh, I wonder how much they paid for that. If that was acceptable, were they given a registration list? What is that sponsor experience? And Troy, what are you seeing both as a sponsor and as someone trying to sell sponsorships for your clients?
Yeah, so I think what Dave was really driving there in the beginning was just we can never have a way to test this, right? In prior, we can never test to see if this would actually work, moving from physical events face to face to actually virtual events. And so I think there is it's the question of 2020 is how can we charge somebody the same amount of money? And I think there's a couple different ways to answer that. So more recently, I've seen you have to realize we're working with associations that are very small, maybe 1 to 2 or 3 people on their entire staff, and then you have associations we work with that are 100 plus employees or association staff in their office. Um, the ones that take the time and critically think and really analyze and come up with great sponsor opportunities and value, I think those virtual events are holding as much value, in some cases even more. I can kind of give a somewhat example. But I think there is a lot of that pulling, and what's happened is a lot of associations were, if you go back to March, April, when all this was rolling out, they did this thing where they were waiting to see what was going to happen. And what they didn't do was take that time while they were waiting to really look at, hey, if this doesn't pan out, how can we move to a virtual, and what does that look like? If you were an organization that did take that time and come up with that strategy, it's paying off. But the ones at the very end who just throw the ball over the fence and say, move it to virtual, it's not working. And that's probably where, at least you've seen, is some of those are just not well put together, not thought out.
It's painful.
It's painful, and the sad part is the attendee doesn't get a great experience, the sponsor doesn't get a great experience, and the association doesn't get a great experience. But if you truly look at the question why. How can you charge somebody? Well, if there is rich content and there is keynote speakers who are hosting a great message that can inspire and drive, um, there are associations that are charging the full amount and have kept their sponsorships the same and have just moved them to different opportunities. And there's lots of ways to do that to create specific value. Spinning off into one-on-one meetings, having private Zoom calls. Think of it as like your CEO room or your young professional leader room, and you're just going to invite those particular people, and that's hosted by a particular sponsor. If you're looking to be in front of that audience, that's a high value because, again, you can never replicate the handshake face to face. But if I'm talking to you just like this one-on-one, it's intimate. This is new relations formed with Andy and Andrew and Dave. This is all new, and there's value in that. And so those virtual events can create that at a cost, and people are paying for it. What I've seen is just how much time do they put into it and really outlining a creative plan.
Yeah, I think before we go on, Troy, I don't know if Elisa told you how much we were charging you for sponsorship of this pod, but we'll make sure that afterwards we'll make sure we know what to send the invoice to.
Brilliant.
No. I think I feel like I need to clarify. I'm not at all suggesting that we shouldn't pay full whack for the experience of a good quality online activity. I'm not going to call it conference, but it's an online presence where there is good content. There are good opportunities to engage with each other and with vendors, and for the vendors to have that opportunity. I mean, what you described there, actually, arguably, that's a far more constructive and productive experience for me as an exhibitor than standing crestfallen in the exhibition or the trade show hall as everybody just treads past you because they don't want to go, they don't want to talk to you. So
Right.
I get that, but I also understand that there's an experience where I've been, and I know other colleagues have been felt like they've been sat in an empty room.
I have been sat in an empty room in a virtual event waiting for people to show up.
Yeah.
I think on paper, as a replacement for a physical event in a time of crisis when we can no longer attend in-person events, on paper, it sounds good, and I think that I've seen them executed poorly. I've seen them executed well. I don't think I've seen anything that would warrant a ticket price at the same price as an in-person event, but I think that there is still a massive opportunity with what's happening now and the way in which we are trying to use technology to provide these events. Because if I was to look into my crystal ball and say what the future was going to look like, it isn't going to be a replacement for in-person events. I think we're all agreed. Yeah. It isn't going to be a replacement for in-person events. But what it does provide is an opportunity to provide a supporting activity that can add more value to members. It's something that people haven't done, that they've realised isn't particularly difficult to do, and if we can use that as a supporting mechanism for in-person events to add additional value, that's what I think the future will end up looking like. And it's a fallback position as well. If something like this happens again, which is almost now at this point probably inevitable, you've got a fallback position and you've got a way to add additional value, so it can be a win-win.
And I presume then that those organizations or those entities that you've sponsored or you've exhibited at, I presume they've all been in touch and asked you your opinion on what a vendor experience could look like online.
You no. Is the and in fact people that have depended upon our sponsorship, it's been more a case of please continue sponsoring us, which is understandable in the current situation. And I think that the timeframes that we're all working to, when we began this conversation, we were talking about how we entered into how we entered into lockdown, and I sort of mentioned it happened at the transition, and Troy was saying the same within the space of a very short space of time. So I don't think people have had the time to prepare. I think we are still experimenting with how we make it work. It's never going to replace in-person events. I think is what it boils down to, but it's definitely providing an opportunity, I think, for organisations to and associations to provide additional value by adopting technology to provide virtual events and supporting content and material around those events.
I think Dave hit on a key word there, and it was content. And I wonder if the future of the sponsor presence within that virtual space isn't content. If this is about struggling for speakers, and back in the old days, staff would resist letting a sponsor up on stage, right? Having a vendor come up and stand at the podium and giving an exhibitor a microphone was, that was taboo. And now, given how many online channels associations are trying to fill and how much content and value they're trying to put out in so many ways, I wonder if sponsors in their own areas of expertise aren't part of that solution.
Yeah, I think, when I'm on the vendor side of the association coin now, but as a chief exec, I think when we were doing our research around this, Lisa, I said that I never met a sponsor who wasn't willing to discuss and pay for the opportunity to contribute to the education program. If I was explicit in saying, look, I'll give you a 75-minute session, you're going to talk about something that's focused around professional development. Of course, at the end of that session, you can say, oh, by the way, there's the problem and we're the solution, right? Okay, that's fine. But I never met a sponsor who wasn't willing to have that conversation. And they were quite upfront and said, yeah, actually, I really love that. And I'd rather have 10 people in the room who know what I'm going to talk about, and they know that I'm also, the supplier of a solution, than be stood in the trade show and thousands walking past me because, today they're not interested in talking to me, so they're not engaged. And so, as a chief exec, I had absolutely no problem, as long as all the communications around it were absolutely clear, that this is where the speaker is from, but they're actually contributing valuable content. Because believe it or not, we're not all the devil incarnate. We actually have a significant amount of knowledge about this sector and about what works well for associations and what doesn't. I think it's a golden opportunity. My concern is that too many associations are afraid to take that step into inviting the vendor onto the platform.
I've done a lot of speaking slots at various events in exhibitions and so on and so forth. And the one thing that, if I was to distinguish between the virtual events and the in-person events that I've done, so I've done a lot of in-person events, and you might get 20, 30, 40 people sitting in front of you on a good day. When you do a 20-minute speaking slot about a topic, because I'm sponsoring the event, I get a speaking slot, which actually, in a lot of cases, I personally don't value the speaking slot that much. And the reason why is that it actually doesn't generate anything that I can use after I've got off of that stage. Whereas the virtual events that I've been attending recently and speaking at have left me with a piece of content that I can market. So as somebody sponsoring that event, I've actually got more value out of those videos, which are now on YouTube and social channels, that I can place on my Twitter, provide them and I literally have provided some to prospective clients, because we've been talking about topics that are relevant to them. It's something that's tangibly of value to me.
Yeah, but so isn't the value? It's not just about walking in the room and then walking out with a contract, isn't it? It's about brand awareness and raising your longer term investment of raising your profile within the sector, surely.
100%, and it absolutely is, which is why the speaking slots are valuable. But it's not valuable when you walk into the room and talk to 20 people and walk out and they never hear it ever again. If I was to walk in there and that was being filmed, and then pushed onto social channels, and I could use that content afterwards. Whereas I think a lot of in-person events take a very traditional format. Trade shows, exhibitions, business cards in the box, loot on the stands, and it's the same format, and it's been that way since as far as I can remember. The format hasn't changed. Wouldn't it be great, as somebody who sponsors, I'm talking as somebody that would sponsor an event at the moment, but wouldn't it be great if, as a sponsor, I had something that I could take away, a piece of content that I could use and market there afterwards? And wouldn't it be great for the people running the events if they could do the same? They own the content, they're the people recording it. And that's a lesson that we can take out of some of these virtual events, I think, is where the value is, but only time will really tell what value that content's going to bring to us. So I think, yeah, sorry.
No, I was Troy kind of sees both sides of this. I mean, he's going out there as a subject matter expert for his clients, but also then as a sponsor to the broader community. And I wonder, for example, when ASAE canceled their in-person meeting, I know they let all of their sponsors out of their obligations, but how have organizations like that, when the cancellation is decided, how are they then evolving or moving you into that virtual space?
So from our side, once that decision has been made to refund, not credit, but refund the money back, a lot of times you have companies doing several different directions. If the company is going through furloughs or layoffs, they're tending to keep that money and do nothing with it. Other companies, we've seen a great spike in sponsor content. We have opened up a complete new line of advertisers and sponsors and exhibitors, quite frankly, that would never normally advertise through some of the communication channels we have, because they'll say everybody knows this. And now that those dollars have been budgeted but not spent, they're coming to us saying, how can I be put in front of this audience? I have a product or service that is very specific to, it could be COVID-19 related. It could be some kind of service that can help people through insurance, through quite frankly, living wills, financial. There's all kind of financial sides of it where companies are coming to us saying, we can help and we can help your members, but how do I get in front of them directly? And sponsor content sections in either newsletters, e-blasts have grown tremendously, and they're pulling those dollars from the events. I've seen that we've seen a big surge in that. The biggest ones we've seen where we have companies calling us saying, thank you for reaching out to us. I would never have advertised, let's say, in a magazine or newsletter. My service or product isn't a direct fit for us to brand specifically like to that kind of audience, but now it is. And so from that sponsorship side, we've seen that increase. From the association side, it's our opportunity to go back to them and make them aware of where those desires are and where that is growing. A lot of associations just don't see that yet, or they're opening their eyes to that now. They realize just direct messaging, kind of like those speaking engagements. If you, as Dave said, he walked in and had 20 people leave, but now you're able to have your brand put into the social media extensions. You are receiving virtual event conference list. You are having preset meetings on a virtual event set up. Those kind of opportunities, if the company is made aware, they're looking for those kind of opportunities. Does that make sense?
Well, I know in our original conversations, you mentioned that online advertising is going through the roof.
Yes. So, obviously the print, it has the question of is print alive, is print dead? That seems to have resurfaced that question more and more. But print is still very much alive. Our print dollars are still coming in as a whole. Obviously, there's been a change in the market, but on the online side, it is absolutely blowing up. It is incredible where those opportunities are. And again, most of that is just looking for ways to have a direct, immediate influx right in front of their members. And that's where we're finding sponsor content or specialized e-blasts or really making growth and popularity.
Well, they know everyone's stuck in front of their computers and at home, so it's eyeballs. It's about eyeballs. It used to be about butts and seats, and now it's about eyeballs.
But is the online content? Oh no, let me rephrase that. You said it was advertising, but is it advertorial or is it just straight adverts? What is
Yeah,
where's
great
the boom?
question. Yep, fair question. So associations don't want straight advertisement. What they want is they want to see some kind of sponsor content that is relative to the industry. Because it is paid for, it is self-serving, but they also don't want it to read as direct as buy my product, buy my service. It's more of here's the problem the industry faces. Obviously, our product or service can answer that problem. When you do a 100% sponsored e-blast, that's your ad. So yes, it is hyperlinked. You can take them directly to a video, to all kind of demonstrations. But it is that the sponsored content ranges anywhere from at minimum 50 words to 300, 400 words on a sponsored kind of an e-newsletter section. If it's an e-newsletter, they get just a quick teaser line, right? You may get 1 or 2 sentences. We've all seen that. Click here to see more. That's where those open up. But that content, yes, it's very much needed to be relative and not always 100% self-serving, but answering a problem that the industry is facing.
Okay.
If it's that way, associations think of us as the hero. They'll look at me and say, hey, that was a great, I just had an association last week say, man, when you pitched this to us a few months ago, I didn't believe in it. Troy, I got to tell you, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere and was completely sold out for the remainder of the year. We're about halfway through next year. It opened up the eyes of the association in terms of that direct marketing piece.
But do you have any data then on the ROI yet?
Well, yeah, I mean, on the clicks, opens, and impressions, you can deliver that right through Google Analytics.
Yeah, but I don't mean the KPIs in terms of people access, and I mean the rate of investment in terms of right. I've spent to create an advertorial. It's gone out there. Is there any data that suggests that that's successful in me securing a contract?
Well, I think it goes back to the branding issue. Are you
Right.
advertising to get a sale, or are you advertising to brand your company?
Yeah.
So that when a decision is made, you're first and foremost in their thought.
Yeah, good point.
That's
Yeah.
And that's all of our advertising at Nailer that we sell. It isn't direct response. It is truly branding.
Yeah, makes sense.
Sure, you've heard that 100 times, right?
Yeah. In exploring this topic, I was under the impression that sponsors and vendors were being left behind or somewhat victimized, being asked for the same amounts of money and not giving opportunity. It's heartening to hear Dave and Troy's experiences that there still are positive opportunities to get in front of audiences and that you're getting tangible return, whether it be lists, whether it be those content pieces. I don't know. This has made me feel better about the world that maybe the association space has found a place to give love to the service providers.
I recently just had a conversation with a very large association that it's not their annual conference, but it's one of their spinoff meetings they have throughout the year, and it was to be held in South Florida. This is a DC-based association, so lots of travel involved, and it's an expense. It's not a net positive. So this is an expense of about $48,000 to have this meeting in South Florida. But because they moved it to virtual, it's only going to cost them around $20,000 to have a very well effective virtual event. So their sponsors are still able to move over, and now they're actually opening up who can attend this, because without the travel restrictions, they've gone back to the attendees and opening up to all their employees. So, and now they're getting those confirmations of events being held or the meetings being held over a certain of 5 days. Obviously, we all experience Zoom fatigue. So you do 1 hour here, 30 minutes there, and over the course of 5 days, they're getting actually greater traction with these confirmed email appointments than they were if they would have actually had the meeting in South Florida. And it's still an expense, but now it's a net positive on their budget that they had for the year. So I was tickled to death to hear that, and I was able to pass along some ideas to help them with their sponsorships as well.
I've seen exactly the same thing. So I was actually you stole my thunder, Troy. I was poised to throw it in about annual conferences. So I've seen two examples. So we've got associations which haven't fared very well financially, predominantly through cancelled events, cancelled training. Predominantly, in fact, that's one of the key reasons. We've got organisations who've had to furlough significant numbers of staff. The organisations that have fared well, two of them have fared very well because they're international organisations that have cancelled annual conferences, which has resulted in large, significant sums in one case of cash reserves. So this was an organisation with 80 global branches, and a significant number of people would attend the annual conference. The cancellation of that conference, well, not the cancellation, turning that conference into a virtual event has saved them significant sums of money, and resulted in no staff being furloughed and a further investment in underlying technology, of which I benefited from, not me personally, but the business benefited from as well. So it was a win-win for all involved. So if I was to make any recommendation, not because we want to get surplus revenue coming into our business, just generally, to me, those annual conferences look like from an external perspective looking in, why are they running them? Particularly an organisation which needs to bring in that case 80 global branches together in one location. All of the travel costs alone for that are staggering. They can and have run these types of events successfully virtually. I think they should definitely be looking at that, particularly larger organisations in the future.
Good point. I think one of the things that we need to make sure that these exemplars of innovation are shared far and wide. And I think, perhaps we can have a chat offline and find out who that success story is and talk to them about sharing their good practice, because that's what the association sector internationally is renowned for, is the willingness to share with each other, share our problems, share our ideas, share our innovations. And so that's what a segue. I'm just going to say thank you both for sharing your insights with us today. We unfortunately have got to wrap this up. I would, however, perhaps like to return to this in about 6, 8, 12 months' time and say, yeah, so how's that $1 million turnover doing for you there, Troy? And we'll see how we're doing. But can I just take this opportunity to thank both Dave and Troy for taking time out. I know, Dave, for us, it's the end of the day. Troy, I think it's the middle of your day over in Florida. And honestly, Lisa, I forget which part of the world you're in these days. You're just on the road all the time. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for having me as well.
Gentlemen, this has been a great kickoff to now our second Association Transformation podcast. And we want to thank our listeners. We hope you've enjoyed the pod, and we'll continue to explore subjects and topics that push the nonprofit community forward, and encourage you to find the Association Transformation podcast on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an episode. Thanks again. And until next time, we hope you put your members and your mission first. This is Elisa. Thanks so much.